One of the hats that I often wear as a musician is that of being a music director for musical theater. And today I'm going to give you a snapshot of what it's like to plan for an entire series of music rehearsals. Hello and welcome to the Musician Toolkit, episode number 91. My name is David Lane, and it is great to be with you once again. I'm going to be referring back to the previous episode in a few ways, but one that I want to go ahead and get out of the way is I realized as soon as I was done with last week's episode 90, at no point did I mention any information about where you can find this podcast and how you can contact me. So you can always find everything at davidlanemusic.com. You can contact me right from that homepage if you have any feedback, any questions, any concerns. You can also find links to all of my socials there, which is where you'll find me at Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, X. I don't think there's one for Threads yet, but if it's not David Lane Music, it's David M. Lane Music, pretty much everywhere. And on YouTube, my handle is at David Lane Music 1. And a lot of you have discovered this podcast this month through YouTube. So hello to my YouTube audience. If that's where you're watching this video of me at a microphone, actually, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll get a little bit more than that today. So thank you for checking this out. If you're listening, I'm going to do my best to share everything in a way that makes sense in pure audio, but there will be some visual things that I'll be going over as well. But if you are on YouTube, please go ahead and like this video. Feel free to comment on it. I love all of the engagement I've received this past month. I know we're in September now. I actually am recording this in very late August, but August has been really one of my best months on YouTube so far, and I'm very appreciative to all of you new and returning viewers, and just all of the wonderful comments that I've gotten this month has meant quite a bit, and I just love connecting with all of you. Okay, so the previous episode was with Bob Moore, and we talked about being a church music director. And one of the things that we talked about kind of a bit briefly was this idea of planning a rehearsal. And if I wanted to follow up, like, what is my rehearsal process for like a choir rehearsal at a church? And for full disclosure, I have not been a music director of a church with regular choir practice in 2 years, but I would get an hour a week for about 9 to 10 months out of the year. And I would just take, depending on the skill level of the choir at the time, the 2 or 3 pieces that we could work on, sometimes up to the 5 or 6, sometimes more, that we're going to go over in a rehearsal. And a lot of times, if we don't have that much time, we're just going to hit like a page or two of certain ones. So anyways, that's it. That would be the episode if I went into that. I am going to go over some things that are a little bit more complicated than that. So today I'm going to go into the world of being a music director for musical theater. Now, I do have another podcast that has been inactive, and it's actually been retired, but I'll go ahead and tell you, if you're listening here, I am thinking about bringing back that podcast on kind of an infrequent basis, but that's news for another time. But that podcast is called Life in the Pit, and that is all about theater musicians. Now, if you've listened to that podcast, if you're a fan, or if you're a fan of musical theater in general, of course you would like that podcast. But I try not to do this type of thing there that much, because I am talking about playing in the pit. It's not really the rehearsal process as much as it is playing for the shows. But there's a chance that maybe I might reshare this episode over there at some point. But anyways, I'm sharing this as an episode on the Musician Toolkit because one of the tools, when I did way back in episode number one, I did 20 tools that I didn't then expanded to 21 when I talked about listening skills. One of those original 20 tools that you should have to be a well-rounded musician is the ability to lead a rehearsal. And except for one episode on conducting, we haven't really talked about that. So now, being a music director for musical theater is a little bit different in a lot of ways. Now, I want to go ahead and say that Some of the things I'm going to go over might be different depending on a few factors. First of all, if you are doing this for a school or community theater or professional, whether or not your actors are paid and like how long you have at a time to rehearse. This is going to influence how we go into this. So let me just give you a primer first on what a music director does for musical theater. So there are several leaders in any theatrical production, any production of a musical especially. The person who's simply called the director is really in charge of the entire production, but there's a lot of things that they don't specialize in. Now, they might be a director slash music director. They might have on multiple hats when it comes to that. But your director is the person who is overseeing everything. And of course, you have your choreographer who's in charge of all of the movement or dance that classifies as dance. Sometimes the director will have specific movement ideas when considering each scene. You also have costume designer. You have a sound designer, a light designer, a scenic designer. You have the stage manager who keeps the rehearsals running in order and communicates with the cast and really does a whole lot of things that could take a long time to explain. The music director is in charge of the music. When you think about a musical, it just sounds like that's a whole lot, but no, there is dancing, there's lights, there's sound, there's costume, there's the acting, there's the engagement, the moving around. Music is just a small part. Well, okay, it's not a small part. Music is just a part, a fairly big part of the musical. And your music director is responsible in a lot of ways. First of all, they either need to play the instruments involved or find musicians who can. So that could include in the rehearsals playing the accompaniment. If you're playing for a theater with a large to even kind of medium budget, which is most of them, there's very often not room to pay a music director and an accompanist for the production unless you're willing to take a pay cut. The official stance of the Musician Toolkit podcast is that you shouldn't take a pay cut unless it would be a huge benefit on your stress level to take a pay cut in order to have an accompanist if you are the music director. So just some general skills that you need to have to be a music director. You need to be comfortable with teaching vocals. And it's okay if you don't have the answers to every single question, like should I be mixing here or should I be using more of my chest voice? I am more than comfortable of saying, ask your voice teacher. I will tell you what I'm looking for. I'm looking for this to be a bright, full sound, or I want it to be a mellow sound. Um, I am not going to give you the full mechanics of how to do that. That is the responsibility of a vocal teacher. And now you might be a vocal teacher as a music director. That could be your background. But if you are like me and you are a pianist first and foremost, as far as being a performer goes, it's okay if you just have some basic knowledge of voice. You have to understand how the voice works from a standpoint of breathing, from a standpoint of forming vowels and consonants, and you have to listen for things like dynamics, tone, cutoffs. That is to say that if a group of singers are singing the same note, they need to cut off at the same time. So just communicating what you're looking for and also listening really closely. So as a music director in a theater in theatrical production, you have to do the accompanying. You have to plan all of the music rehearsals. That is the rehearsals where the cast comes in and learns all of the songs of the show. I've had as few as 2 or 3 music rehearsals. I've had as many as 14 or 15. That may be a little slight exaggeration, but maybe 12. On average, I would say I get about 8 or 9 music rehearsals, and these are typically 2.5 to 3 hours long. You're also responsible for music during the show unless it is being run by the person operating the sound and its tracks. And the company has rented those tracks. So really, your job is done once the show opens. If you're the music director, you just have to get them to that point. although some theaters will ask you to come in to help lead a vocal warm-up. But if you have a live band or a live orchestra, then you need to be hiring those musicians, or you need to have outsourced that to a contractor to find your musicians. You need to make sure you know what they're getting paid and that you communicate that well. You need to plan a separate rehearsal or two for them. Make sure that they're coming in on at least a couple of dress rehearsals and that they know what time to be there at each show. You know, your call time is going to be anywhere from 30 minutes to 90 minutes ahead of opening curtain. And of course, you need to figure out if you can just conduct the show or if you have to play an instrument at the same time. And a lot of times that's necessary because you're being paid a flat rate. The musicians that you hire, the additional musicians that you hire, are typically being paid per service. But all of that is an overview. What I want to talk about today is planning the music rehearsals with the cast because it can be tricky. Again, sometimes you don't have that many music rehearsals. And again, I'm going to give you two examples today that involve two very different shows that I've done this decade with community theater. And I just want to go over some of the things that you have to do in advance. The first thing is you need to know who the cast is. You need to know who is playing which character. And you need to kind of get an idea in order to save time, not doing this in the first rehearsal. You need to have an idea of their vocal range. Hopefully, it's been a situation where you've been at the audition, you've heard everybody, and you've made notes on everybody who auditioned, whether they got the role or not, including vocalizing them to see how high they can sing, how low they can sing, and you make notes, and that's really good. One of the theaters that I've done work for, that's one of the examples that I'm going to give, doesn't really require my presence because of the way that they do music auditions. And so I don't really have a say in the casting at all when it comes to that regard. And I don't get a chance to get the notes. So I'm doing surveys in advance as much as I can. And for the ones that it doesn't work that way to get the information I need, I do take time during a first rehearsal or time during the breaks to kind of work things out. Okay, so then you need to get a copy of the score. And this is where I'm going to start sharing some materials here in just a moment. So you get a score, either a piano vocal score or a piano conductor score, or sometimes it's just the vocal score, but that doesn't help unless you have full tracks that you're using from the beginning, because again, you need to play the accompaniment during the rehearsals. So the shows that I'm going to talk about today is a production of that I did this year of Rock of Ages, which is a rock musical set in the 80s, features a lot of popular hard rock songs from the 70s through the early 90s. And then another show I'm going to go over is one that I did 2 years ago, a production of Into the Woods. Again, very different productions. So the first thing I want to show you is what I would do for each of these productions when it comes to the songs. So this is a couple of different ways that I have done this before. And I actually haven't really done this quite that often, but when you have a lot of different cast members and you don't have a lot of time to rehearse, one of the worst things that you can do is to not be organized in how you plan your rehearsal so that you've got certain actors just sitting around and waiting. If you want to become an unpopular music director, just do everything in book order. Like start with song one, then start with song two, and then go to song number three, even though one actor may not sing until you get to song number nine. So this is just not a good way to go about it. Now, one of the things I'm not going to show you here on the video version of this podcast, I'm not going to show you any conflict sheets. I found no reason to keep those files after the show is done, so I don't have them. And also, I probably wouldn't show you if I did because it'd be showing you first and last names of the actors, and I'm not wanting to do that. But here is one way that I do Rock of Ages. So the way I did this was I set out some categories. Like when I got to the first song, it's called Noise, Paradise, Good Time. It's probably an abbreviation of what it was actually called. And I just noted that that was full company. So I put that under the heading of full company. That just tells me everybody who is an actor in the show sings on that song. So everybody needs to be called when we rehearse that. And then I got to song number two, and it called for the character of Father, Mother, Sherry, True, and Franz. So that was Sister Christian. I put that under that heading. And then I got to song number three, We Built This City, Too Much Time. And that called for Hertz, Regina, Mayor, Lonnie, Dennis, Stacy. And I noted it also included the ensemble. And I'll just kind of just stop there. I went through basically the whole thing. Every time I found a different combination of voices, I did a new heading, but you can kind of see um and under full company, I also did song nine, Feel the Noise. We're not going to take it. Song 11, Here I Go Again. Song 18, Every Rose Has Its Thorn. Song 22, Don't Stop Believing. Under the third heading there, that where I had song number three, I also found that that fits song number eight. I want to know what love is. So then we get to a duet with Lonnie and Dennis. I Can't Fight This Feeling also includes the ensemble. One of the main characters is Drew. He has a solo in song 3A, Heaven 1, 4A, Heaven 2, 5A, Heaven 3. And then he sings with the ensemble on I Wanna Rock, which is song 4. And I just kind of scroll down. I've got a bunch of categories right here, but it shows me who sings what. Now, this was my second time doing this production, so I don't know that this is my favorite way of organizing it. Another way, I didn't pull it up, but another way that I've also done this is just done song one, song two, song three, song four, whatever, and indicated who sang in each one. I like to put the cast in all capital letters so that I can see it very clearly, and I just keep the song titles just regular capital first letter, lowercase for all the rest. Okay, now I want you to notice something else. So I'm not sure how this is showing up, so I'm going to go ahead and enlarge this a little bit. This is something else that I do. If you notice what I do here on song number one, Noise, Paradise, Good Time, and in parentheses, 45 minutes. What that means is that I have, based on my experience of teaching songs in the past and just kind of knowing, what it's like, for most community theater casts, I determined that I need 45 minutes of time to be able to teach this well enough that I can now trust the cast to have made recordings and go practice on their own. So it's not to say that they'll learn it in 45 minutes, but I'll feel like I've done my job if I spend 45 focused minutes on the song. Now, sometimes I am wrong on that in both directions. I have put something like 45 minutes when it really took an hour and a half, and I put 45 minutes when it really only took 20 or 25. So what I find is I try to guess a little bit conservatively. So if I'm really thinking that I could do it in 40, I go ahead and add 5 minutes. So I like to have that buffer time. And the worst thing that can happen is that we get more work done than I thought in rehearsal, or we leave early. We got all the work done, and you can reward the cast with, let's go home 30 or 45 minutes early. So sometimes that happens. So you look at song number nine, Feel the Noise, Not Going to Take It. I determined that was a 25-minute piece, 25 minutes to learn it. Here I Go Again, allowing 25 minutes. Song number 18, Every Rose Has Its Thorn, kind of allowing 30 minutes for that. Don't Stop Believing. That one I wanted 50 minutes on. So we keep on going. Now, if you scroll down, you're going to see for Drew that I put 2 minutes by some of these songs, and I might just put them all together and round up to like a 10-minute section to go through all of them. But the whole idea is those pieces are about 8 measures of solo to sing, and very simple. Okay, so now let me show you what I do with that. Now, again, I have a conflict sheet, and it tells me who's going to be out all day on certain music rehearsal days, and maybe who might be arriving later. And of course, we've got the time, and some of the times they're actually split rehearsals, like they do choreography for an hour, they do music for 2 hours or something like that. So here is what that rehearsal looked like, and this was earlier this year. And this is a copy of what I sent the cast in our Facebook group for that production. So Feel the Noise, Not Gonna Take It. I think I said that was 25 minutes on the other sheet. So I allow 30 minutes in this production because I kind of also know that built into that is a warm up. It's built into some talking. There were times that I used to be very, I said this in the last episode, I was very anal. I would, if I thought something took 25 minutes, then I would do that. I would make it exactly 25 minutes. Well, again, it's nice to have buffer times. So I like to round up on all of these. So, anyways, based on that, look at this first rehearsal. I start off big. I start off with the company. That means everybody's there and we sing two of the songs. We sing song number 9 and song 11. And everybody is there for an hour. So then we get to the 8:30 mark. And this was a mistake that I made at the time because I didn't understand one of the situations. Sometimes your smaller characters happen to be part of the ensemble when they're not singing their main character. So I thought it was okay for me to put Harden My Heart, Shadows of the Night toward the end, where you had Sherry, Justice, and the ensemble, because the ensemble has been there the whole time. Sherry has been there the whole time. And I thought it'd be fine to have Justice in there because she's been part of the ensemble. Well, I learned on the first day, Justice is not part of the ensemble. She is a standalone character and she plays only that character. So I'm pretty sure I gave Drew a small break and we went to Harden My Heart so that I could then let everybody who wasn't Drew, Sherry, and ensemble go. And then we went on with that rehearsal. But had Justice been a part of the ensemble, she would have been there the whole time. And, Drew would eventually be let go around 9:20 if we stay on schedule. All right, so that was on Thursday, January 4th. Monday, January 8th. Right at the top, I tell the cast the characters the actors who play Franz and Justice are not needed that day. So we start off with Renegade, which is just Stacy and the ensemble. We get to 7:10. That's because that's really like a two-page piece, not much to it. We get to 7:10, and we're working on Dead or Alive, which we already had Stacy, we already had the ensemble. We're adding Sherry. We allow 30 minutes for that. We get to 7:40, and it's Waiting for a Girl Like You and Hate Myself for Loving You. I'm allowing 40 minutes for that one. And we already had Stacy, we already had Sherry, we already had the ensemble, we've added Drew. And you kind of see how this works, keeps going. Now at 9:35, I asked Hertz to just kind of work on keep on loving you and solos from company numbers. I'm sure I did that because the actor who played Hertz was not there the previous rehearsal and had told me so in advance. So that was a good time to go over his parts. Now, a lot of times on the flow of this rehearsal, I can go ahead and tell you I planned out through probably the 9th and then had not planned the 15th and 16th and the 18th. A lot of the shows in this production or the rehearsals I did 2 and 3. Well, I did 2 or 3 at a time with about maybe 4 or 5 days notice, just to try to get everything together. So, anyways, that went through Thursday, January 8th, and you can see how I start doing how I start handling the rehearsals at this time, like 8:15, and we went from 7 to 10 on these rehearsals a lot of times. So 8:15 ensemble only review of other songs. So we had some songs on there there's some specific ones that involve the ensemble, and then we went over just what the ensemble sings on everything else. Okay, now I want to give you a snapshot of a very different show. This one is much different. So Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim. There are no single songs that are quite as long. What Into the Woods does is it has a lot of suites of separate songs put together. There are several things that might be 3 and 4 songs melded together to create the bigger number. Like the opening number, just refresh my memory real quick. The opening number is in 9 sections. The Act 1 finale is in 4 sections. The Act 2 finale is in 4 sections, although one of those happens to be instrumental, so I didn't include it. All right, so I want to go ahead and show you what I had to do with this. There are a number of characters in this show, and I'll blow this up just a little bit. There we go. I think that works really well. All right, so this one needed a spreadsheet pretty much. So I've got the song title in column 1. In column 2, I have how much time it will take to learn all of those songs. In column 3 through, well, I guess I should use the letters. So column A is the song, column B is the time, column C is the dates. And this was based on kind of when I thought I could get to it based on the conflicts. This show was done a little bit more all at once. So the rehearsals were done or planned all in a batch. I did not really make very many adjustments as we went. Okay, so then I've got a column D through X are characters that appear in these numbers. Some of these characters include the narrator, Cinderella, Jack, the baker, the baker's wife, Little Red, Rapunzel, the witch, the stepmother, Florinda, Lucinda, Jack's mother, Cinderella's father, the wolf, and a few others in there. Okay, now it has been, if you're looking at this on video, it has been a little while, so I think the way this was organized was by the date that I was going to get to things. So everything that is on the 28th is indicated, everything is on the 29th, the 31st, and I think this was like March and April of 2022 that we were doing these rehearsals, if I remember correctly. So when I look at this first one, I'm able to look at this information. I have to go all the way across, but I can see the song is called Cinderella at the Grave. I need 5 minutes to teach it. Calls for Cinderella and Cinderella's mother. It's a short piece, but I needed to know that. All right. And then A Very Nice Prince. I need 5 minutes. Calls for Cinderella. It calls for the baker's wife. And by the way, if you're thinking, well, how do I know how long it's going to take to teach something? For me, I like to think of, well, let's say you have 4-part harmony for 8 measures. Well, you need to think of that as you're teaching 32 measures because you're teaching 8 of part 1, 8 of part 2, 8 of part 3, 8 of part 4. But another thing I want to go ahead and say is a lot of time rehearsal time is determined by your knowledge of who is singing. The actresses who played Cinderella and Baker's wife, they were accomplished enough vocalists so they could basically teach themselves. So I only allowed 5 minutes for that. I figured that's all we needed. A Very Nice Prince reprise also calls for the same too. So Cinderella and Baker's wife. So I know that when I plan the rehearsal schedule, that's going to be like a 10-minute slot for them. All right, On the Steps of the Palace. That's a 10-minute piece. It only called for Cinderella. Again, 10 minutes to learn, to teach. Song 58. Again, you get the idea of the scale of this musical. Moments in the Woods. That was just the baker's wife. So you see why I organized those in a clump. Cinderella and or the baker's wife sings in all of those. All right, then I look for what I was going to be doing on the 29th, and we have Hello, Little Girl, which called for 15 minutes. And it just involved Little Red and the wolf. Okay, so we can keep on going. I am not going to read through this whole thing, but you see how, like in the opening number, you see these X's everywhere. Well, I should say in a lot of places, not everywhere. And that's important too, because I need to kind of rule out who is not here. And sometimes I hide some of these rows so that I can, make that adjustment. But just so you can see, this goes all the way to song 66. And really very interesting. Nothing did I allow more than 25 minutes to learn because again, these parts were in such a way that nothing was very long. It's like it was kind of lumped together with a lot of other things. So having said that, I want to show you now what I did for the rehearsal. So for the rehearsal for Into the Woods, on Monday, March 28th. I was right, it was March. I called the baker's wife for Moments in the Woods. And then I just said, and we will go through my spreadsheet and we'll find all of the solos she has and other numbers. We're just going to go through all of those. That's a way of kind of not taking times on the company numbers or the large scale numbers where we have to go over all the solos. So I allotted us an hour and 15 minutes to go through everything she sings in the show. At 8:15, I added Cinderella so that we could go over a very nice Prince and reprise. Both of those were 5-minute pieces. I needed 10 minutes, but again, I allowed an extra 5 minutes. That's potentially a time to take a break if we get ahead. And then at 8:30, I let Baker's wife go. We go through On the Steps of the Palace, solos from other numbers, and then I just told Cinderella's mother to come as soon as 8:30 that she can, and whenever she gets there, we'll go over Cinderella's grave. So if you look at Tuesday, March 29th, you see that I've got all of the songs that Jack sings from 7:15 to 8:30. And that probably started at 7:15 because Tuesday through Thursday were days that I could not get there until 7:15. 8:30, we have Little Red and Wolf going over Hello, Little Girl. And by the way, I apologize if you hear any traffic noise in the background. It seems like everybody with a loud muffler is out on the road today. I'm hoping you don't hear too much of that. All right, now 8:45, I didn't go over this, but it calls for Agony and Reprise, and it is with Cinderella's Prince and Rapunzel's Prince. And the reason that's really important is that one of them, I think it was Cinderella's Prince, is also played by the wolf. So that's something that my spreadsheet did not indicate, but I had a cast list and I was able to determine that whenever I worked on anything with the wolf, it also made sense to work on songs that had Cinderella's Prince because it is the same actor. All right, I'm going to scroll down to kind of a big day. So look at Sunday, April 3rd. This was when we had a 1 to 5 rehearsal, 4-hour rehearsal. So I start off with Little Red, 1 to 1:15, and we do the song I Know Things Now. And then we add The Witch and Cinderella, and we do Last Midnight for 15 minutes. And then we add The Baker and the Baker's Wife, and we do Your Fault. And I don't know why I allowed so much time for that. I think that's a typo. And I think we adjusted. I think this was the schedule I sent out, and I said, hey, actually, why don't we start at 1:30 instead? And I think that's what we did. We started, so it became 1:30, 1:45, 2 o'clock. Then we had a break built in. And then at 2:45, we did the Act 1 opening sequence. And we worked on that for 30 minutes. And then we have the Act 2 opening sequence, and we did that for 15 minutes. And actually, I'm trying to figure out why we spent so little time on that. But it may be that it was a lot of solos and we'd already covered them in those moments where we were just going over individual solos with each actor. So then we did First and Second Midnight, where we add Rapunzel, her prince, steward, and mysterious man. And now everybody's there, and we do the full company, Act 1 finale, Act 2 finale from 3:45 to 4:30. Then I let several people go. We have Cinderella, Jack, Baker, Little Red, No One Is Alone. And then we do No More with Baker and the Mysterious Man. Now, Mysterious Man, that's an example of there's a 15-minute time frame where he's sitting around. So it's not perfect. You're not all, especially with a big show, you're going to not always be able to get everything just right. All right, the last thing I want to show you, this is a little fun. It's something that you have to consider when you have a live orchestra. And we had a full 15-piece orchestra for Into the Woods. And I did not save anything that I did with Rock of Ages in this regard. Is probably in archived emails, but this was a sheet that I sent out to the orchestra, and I kept it as an updated file, and I used color codes and everything, as you will see right here. This is Into the Woods performance notes, updated May 11th, 2022. And I've got a little legend at the top in black font is the original notes. In blue is notes that were added through the SITS probe, and then red are the notes since the SITS probe. A SITS probe, by the way, is when the orchestra first plays with the cast. The cast first gets to hear the orchestra. They get to sit down with their books open, sing through the score with the orchestra present. So there were notes that I had that I gave them in advance. There's some notes that we added on a second run going into the sits probe. And then obviously I sent this out before the first dress rehearsal. It's some notes that got added afterwards. And this is a 3-page document. So I will not read all of this out loud or go over all of it, but I'll go over a few things. So the ones in black ink, and and this is the reason for the color code is so that the musicians can know what they should have already indicated. But this is some things like this. So Act 1, opening part 1. Measure 28 downbeat will be shown after the fermata, but no one plays until the last eighth note. So it probably makes more sense in context, but that's some information I wanted them to have. Measure 57 and similar. Treat all safety as vamp unless otherwise noted. So sometimes you get the word safety in a score, and safety means you might not even play the measure, or you might play it once, or you might play it 20 times. You never know. A vamp means we're going to repeat it until instructed to go on. So where we were in the show at that point, I just felt it was safe to say that everything is a vamp. Measure 69, free tempo. So that means really watch on that measure. Measure 70 was conducted in 3. I have no idea what the tempo actually, I mean, what the meter was or what I was doing before. It might have been in 1. It might have been in 3, 4, and I was conducting in 1, but going to 3 for that measure. And then measure 117, adding a poco ritardando. Kind of looking at some other highlights, I said that in song 3, which is the part 3 of the opening, measures 2 and 3 conducted in 6. Measures 35 and 36 will not be conducted. So that is probably like a free cadenza for the actors, or it's a place where there's a pause in the music. So I say after measure 34, my next downbeat will be for measure 37. So these are all notes that the musicians can make on their parts. Like one of the things I had added since the sits probe was for Act 1 opening part 5. Measure 12 is a safety measure. Vocals during the last time. That's very helpful. They know when the vocal, we're repeating it, but or we might repeat it. That's what the safety means. If you hear the vocals, then you're playing it for the last time. So if the vocals are there right when you get there, you know that we're not repeating it all. We're going on. One of the things we added just before the sits probe is that measure 88 is exactly 3 times. So that's not a vamp. It's not a normal repeat where you play it twice. Play it 3 times. And on beat 1 of measure 89, we're going to add a fermata. So there's just a lot of things that get added to make the show flow smoother. So first midnight, no accelerando at measure 41. It probably said to accelerando. Giants in the Sky, measures 1 through 5. I'll conduct the downbeats only because I just found it way too hard to try to conduct it uh, every single beat. In number 24, fanfares, I said measure 5 is a possible vamp. It's a cappella only in the cast, so that no one's playing. And I will clearly show measure 6. Agony, conducted in a slow 2 for 6/8 and 3 for 9/8. So always helpful to make sure that they know what we're doing. For second midnight, I said measures 18 and 19. Instead of what was marked as play 2 times and fade, changed it to vamp, fade, and jump to measure 20 on the cue. The cue is that I will give as a conductor. And by the way, if you're wondering what am I doing besides conducting, I also played the synthesizer book, mostly with my left hand. So this was a fun activity in just multitasking. And here's a fun note right here. This is for 65. No One Is Alone, Part 1. You can see where I scratched out an old note or an original note. The original said measures 1 through 13 conducted in 2, where the dotted half equals the beat. I changed that to measure 1 through 13 starts in 4 as marked, and then when we get to measure 14, we're in 2. And that measure 14 is now a safety measure, and that it's very free tempo. Free tempo is just, that's my way of telling the orchestra, watch me. So I have no idea how this episode comes across as an audio form, and I'm hoping I edit it well enough that it's not too much of a drag when I put it on video. It's one of those, this sounded like a better idea, but I'm not so sure how the execution was. So let me just kind of summarize the rehearsal process. You need to get a list of all of the songs you're going to be rehearsing. You need to know which actors are playing which characters, which ones are in the ensemble, and at some point you need to know what their vocal range is. So especially when you're doing ensemble, you assign soprano, alto, tenor. And this is a funny thing. Choir usually has a bass part, but in musical theater, they almost always call it a baritone part. You need to note the song list. You need to figure out how long you need to adequately teach all of the material to the cast for each song. And then you need a conflict list so that you can figure out which actors are not even going to be there certain days. So there's no point in scheduling songs on those days or during the times of those days that they're out. If it sounds like a lot, it is. And that's why I wanted to focus on musical theater music directing today, because this is not what you do in church choir situation. In church choir situation, you just assume everything is choir. You'll have everybody there, or people will be out, but you'll be doing the same thing week after week. And you try to get 4 or 5 pieces in. Not nearly as complicated as what you're trying to do in this particular situation. So this is just how to plan a rehearsal. This is how to communicate with your orchestra, how to communicate with the cast. We haven't talked about strategies for leading rehearsal. If that's something you're interested in, let me know, and I might include that as a future episode, either here or on Life in the Pit. I'm starting to plan the material for that when that comes back, probably possibly later this year, but probably early next year. All right. Personally, I found this to be kind of an exhausting episode. It's like I now realize why I'm glad I don't do 9, 10, or 11 productions in one year. It's like I've only done one production this year. I'll do another one coming up in November. And that one's easy because I don't work with the cast. I am just the conductor of the orchestra. It's a big production, 19 pieces in the orchestra. Uh, and I did this last year, so I've got all the notes already set up. I just have to make adjustments to it based on what changes we make this year. So that is going to do it. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. Maybe a little bit longer of an episode than I thought, but isn't that how it usually goes? So anyways, I hope that you found this as fascinating as I have, as I've gotten into this whole craft of being a music director for theater. It is a lot of work, but it is a lot of fun, and it definitely will keep you from being bored. By the way, if you have any stories as a music director that you would like to share, you can do so with your own voice, and I will be happy to consider putting it on a future episode of this podcast. And you can do that by going to speakpipe.com/musician toolkit. So that's going to wrap up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.